Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of the Parenting Reframe podcast. I'm excited to have you back. I'm going to do a quick little mini-sode solo episode today, talking all about self-regulation and how do we help kids self-regulate. I'm going to give you the 7 tips that I give parents that I coach when I've taught workshops. And self-regulation, essentially, before we even dive in, is the idea of, in simplistic terms, it's how do you get your child to calm down when they're not calm? So how do they gain the ability to understand that A, they're going to be okay, and B, the outcome isn't likely going to change, and that C, they're safe and that they can regulate their bodies. So let's jump right into it. Number 1 on my list is co-regulation. What does co-regulation really mean? So co-regulation is the idea that we are working on regulating ourselves while our child is working on regulating himself or herself. So essentially, and I've said this a gazillion times, but a dysregulated adult cannot help a dysregulated child, meaning somebody's got to be the anchor. Somebody's got to be the calm one in that equation. So if you find that you get highly triggered the minute your child starts to express negative emotions, and I'm saying negative like kind of in air quotes because it's, to me, those are just feelings that we all have to feel and experience and work through, but obviously I understand that they're taxing and difficult. So when your child starts to exhibit or express a tantrum, a meltdown, for older kids, arguments, eye rolling, whatever the thing is that gets you, that triggers you, if you escalate with your child, usually 2 things happen. One is that you either lash out and give some type of a punishment or something that ends up scaring your child into stopping. Or the other one is we might kind of try to double compensate by giving something else, like, okay, just please stop crying and then we'll do this. It's like in either scenario, what we're really communicating to our child is, when you're in this emotional state, it makes me so uncomfortable. I have to either join you and become just as dysregulated, or I have to start anxiously offering new things. So in either scenario, we're not really getting to the meat of what we really need, which is to help them self-regulate. That's the goal, right? You want it so that they develop and build that skill on their own, which, by the way, takes time. And they're not born with it. They're not born with it at all. So if you feel like that is you and you are that kind of parent, I want you to know that A, you're not alone, and B, I just hosted a workshop and it's completely free. I will put the link in the show notes if you want to watch the replay. And it's 60 minutes of me talking about emotional regulation in parents. It's so important that we have a roadmap for ourselves so that we know how to guide our children when they're hitting these moments and we're just all kind of panicking or we feel like our backs are against the wall. And I want you to know you're not alone, because I think I posted about that workshop and I did it in less than 48 hours after the first post, and I had about 275 people signed up for it. So clearly you're not alone. Clearly you're not the only person who feels like you get triggered and you get really emotionally heightened when your child is dysregulated. So it's a really common concern, and I think it's fair, and I think we absolutely have to give ourselves a way through that. So co-regulation happens when we are staying calm. We are working on our own triggers. We are working on our response patterns. So instead of being reactive, we're looking at how can we thoughtfully respond in this moment. We're actually not saying a lot during a tantrum. I've said this so many times, but you're really just holding space, setting the boundary, and you're just there with your child, remaining calm, remaining neutral, not feeling agitated, not getting intense, not feeling sort of stressed and anxious and any of those things. You really are working at dialing it down for yourself so that you can really be there to model for them and to show them what it is to stay calm even when things aren't going your way. Number 2, boundaries are another tool to help children with self-regulation. Boundaries are hard, and when I coach families, a lot of what we work on is this idea of what boundaries do we set? Where do we start? What are boundaries that are developmentally appropriate for our child? These are just things that come up in coaching. When is the right time to set a boundary? What if my child's overly tired, right? These are the life moments that kind of get in the way of how we set boundaries, and I work with parents on this all the time because it is a little bit dicey and everyone's situation is a little bit different. But essentially, boundaries are a structure that is predictable and it's consistent. And children who struggle to regulate their emotions are looking to us for this predictable structure. When our responses are unpredictable, when the boundaries sort of feel porous or not quite in line with what you did last time and the time before, maybe mom and dad or mom, your partner, you guys parent completely differently. It's important that our boundaries are consistent, but that they're also there. We don't want to really fall into passive parenting if we find that we have a child who becomes dysregulated easily. We want to dig a little deeper and figure out what the trigger is for the child. Is it frustration tolerance the minute they get frustrated? Is it that they can't tolerate hearing no as an answer? Is it that every time they have to transition, it becomes a problem? Right? We can map all of this out, but we want to get kind of play detective in those moments. But setting boundaries is critical. I gave this analogy the other day when I was doing a quick little video on TikTok about the spectrum of emotions, and I wrote an article about it too. But essentially, what we want to think about is that for children, we are expecting them to self-regulate right away. And the truth is, it's a skill, and it's a skill that has to be developed and learned, and it's our job to foster and facilitate that learning. So, for example, if I decided that tomorrow I'm going to try to train so I can run for a marathon, I run occasionally, but I am nowhere near in shape for a marathon. So if I went to a coach and I said, hey, I'm really wanting to do a marathon in, I don't know, 6 to 9 months, could you train me, please? But by the way, as I'm acquiring this new skill, could we please not endure any struggle? And could you please make sure to not challenge me? I just really want to coast and get to the finish line. It's the same idea. We're asking our kids to be able to build the skill of self-regulation without actually allowing them to experience dysregulation and then to come through the dysregulation on a different side, right? To calm themselves down. The more they're dysregulated and calmed down, the better they get at it. The better they get at it because they start to realize, oh, one, I'm okay. Two, oh, I remember getting upset about that the last time and I cried for a while. I still didn't get the thing that I wanted, but I was okay and I actually could make a different choice. And then I played with something. Like, they start to do that themselves. We're not the ones who have to constantly bombard them with different ideas and redirect and do all these things. We want to give them the space to cultivate this skill internally so that they can do that. Let's jump right into number 3, validation. We often miss validation when we are talking to our kids in moments of dysregulation. And it's important that we really understand what we mean when we're saying, when we're saying validation. It doesn't mean that we're saying, hey, you get a pass. That's not the thing that we're saying. What we're saying in that moment is that we can understand why they're feeling sad. We know and we see that the situation that they're in is causing them to feel frustrated. And all we have to do is acknowledge that. When my son was younger and he used to come home from school and he would say, I hate homework, I used to fight him all the time. Homework is our responsibility. Don't complain, right? Like a litany of corrections came his way. And then I started to think about it and I was like, I didn't like homework either. So I'm just going to at least draw that parallel and let him know I understand and I see him. So I said, I know, I get it. I used to feel the same way. I know it's not fun to do homework. I get that frustration. And the minute I started to do that, it didn't take long. Our arguments didn't last long. We got through it. There is so much power in validation, especially when we do validation long term. We have to practice it all the time. Again, it doesn't mean that we're always just giving a pass. It's not the same thing. Validation is simply seeing the struggle. Doesn't mean the struggle has to go away, but it's just seeing the struggle and going, I know, I see you, I feel you, I get it, I know it's hard, but I'm here and I'm with you. Validation is a key thing to hold on to and to remember. Breath work is a super important tool for self-regulation. I wouldn't work on breath work during a tantrum. I wouldn't work on anything during a tantrum, quite frankly. I've said this before, but regulation happens, or self-regulation happens when we practice it during moments of regulation, meaning when they're calm. So we can do different types of breath work. We can do blowing out candle breath work. That's just basically where you tell your child, pretend that you're blowing out your candles and I want you to blow as hard as you possibly can. Sometimes I do fire hose breathing with kids that I've worked with, and that's where they try to make their breath sound like the sound of a hose, a fire hose with water gushing out. Anything that can help that nervous system start to calm back down is going to be really helpful. So breath work is another key in this process. For some kids, they might not love it. And if they don't, that's fine. You're going to kind of trial and error a lot of things. I have some kids who go to it right away once they learn it and they'll go, I'll take a deep breath, and they quickly take a deep breath. And I have some kids at the minute you say take a deep breath, it makes the tantrum 7,000 times worse. So you want to really look at what is going to work and what isn't, and don't feel defeated if you try something and it maybe didn't work the way you had hoped. That's okay. That's okay. We're just always going to offer ideas, and it's really up to them what they want to choose to take and what they don't want to take. And again, in moments of dysregulation, when we start to offer up the tools, often that triggers our kids even more because they perceive it as a demand in a moment when they really cannot handle anymore. So even when we say take a deep breath and our intentions are really good, in that moment all they see is she's telling me to do more. He's giving me another direction. And they're not there for it. They're not in the moment where they're able to receive it. The kids that I've worked with, 9 out of 10 times, they go to it themselves. I've never said, hey, stop and take a deep breath. They usually almost always, even just they'll see me calmly sitting with them and they'll do it themselves. They'll go, I need a big deep breath. And I'll say, okay, let's try that. So I kind of follow their lead. If they're going to use it, great. If they don't want to use it, that's okay too. So I think it's really critical, though, to teach that as just a general practice, especially younger. I didn't learn about the benefits of breath work until I was much older. I started doing yoga 10 years ago, and that's when I was first introduced to it. And then, more and more thereafter. And oh my gosh, like I wish I had it in my 20s. I wished I had it in my teens and even younger. So don't underestimate sort of the value of breath work. It really, really is so helpful. I've mentioned this before, but sensory toys are wonderful too. Sensory toys, you can kind of look them up. There are so many different ones. This is one of the ones on my list that I'm talking about in terms of the 7 pieces to self-regulation. But sensory toys, what they can do for a lot of kids, think like fidget spinners, the tubes that expand and contract, the poppers. There are so many different ones. There are some that are visually stimulating. There are some that have more tactile kind of features to them, meaning as you touch them, they may be bumpy or they make different sounds, or there is some feedback in that tactile piece. Whatever it is, I would just have a basket of them around, and then they can play with them when they're regulated and they can use them when they're dysregulated. But you just want them available. There's a lot to be said about sensory toys. I know in our culture, a lot of the elderly used to use like what's now referred to as thinking beads, but I can think of every single grandparent and elder in my family, and they always held on to thinking beads and strung the beads through with their fingers or in between the fingers. And that it's the same thing, right? It's this calming mechanism. You're using your hands, it's slowing you down, there's a rhythm to it. So stay open to that. And this is something that comes up a lot, but they're marketed towards kids with autism and ADHD, but in all honesty, I think everybody needs sensory toys. So whether you're older, younger, it doesn't really matter. I wish they wouldn't put a label on it because it's not necessary. They really benefit all of our kids and all people, quite frankly, in a lot of different ways. So stay open to sensory toys. I have a couple of brands that I like. I'll try to share them in the show notes, but in general, you can find them anywhere. And my last one is we want to, and I said this already, but number 7 is we want to work on regulation while they're regulated. We often try to stop the tantrum while it's happening. We want them to calm down in the moment. That's not very effective though. It's not going to help them in those moments. They're generally, and you probably already know this, if you try to talk to them during a tantrum or tell them to stop or what's wrong or talk to me, what's happening, they usually escalate even more, scream even more. That's when we start to see things like, I hate you, you're the mean mommy, you're a mean daddy, whatever the case is. And then the language starts to get worse. So 9 out of 10 times, we can't really work on it right in the moment with the exception of co-regulation. The minute you see that they're starting to escalate, you want to almost immediately kind of anchor down yourself and recognize that it's time for you to get really calm and steady so that you can help them through whatever is about to happen. That's sort of the best way to look at it. But regulation skills or self-regulation skills happen when a child is actually regulated. So I'm going to quickly swing through what do you do in the moment, because I feel like that's what the question always is then. And what are we supposed to do? So if that's like we're not supposed to do very much in that moment, then tell us exactly what it is that was expected of us. So number 1 is, I always share this, but do the boundary empathy sandwich. So let's say little Johnny comes over and says, can I please have a popsicle before dinner? And you say, no, you can't. And then he starts to immediately get upset. He really wants the popsicle. He starts begging for the popsicle. You say, I know, but you can't have the popsicle. And now this goes back and forth. The boundary sandwich is like this. Can I have a popsicle? Please, please, please. I really, really want one. And you're going to say, no, not right now, but maybe after dinner. And he immediately starts to cry. This might even lead into a tantrum. You go right into your boundary empathy sandwich. And here's the empathy. So you studied your boundary already. No, you can't have the popsicle. Here comes the empathy. I know it's really hard not to get the thing that we want. I get that. We get that feeling. Doesn't mean he gets the popsicle, but we get the feeling. I know it's really hard to not get the thing that you want. And then we restate the boundary. But you can have a popsicle after dinner. We don't ask. We don't come through with 15 other choices. We don't do all these other things. You just do the boundary empathy sandwich. And I promise you, over time, it does get so much better. They will stop. They will start to go, okay, I'll have it after dinner. And that's eventually what you want them to get to. Okay, number 2 is remind yourself that I'm safe and so are they. When I talk to parents about emotional dysregulation in parents, what often comes up, and I share this in the free workshop that I mentioned earlier, is that when we were younger, more often than not, our negative, and I'm again, quote unquote, sort of expressions of emotions, so like crying, if we had an anger outburst, whatever it was usually met with a negative response. So something like, you better stop crying right now. You're going to go to your room if you keep crying. You were likely maybe punished for crying or for expressing a sad emotion. So as a result, we sort of learned that when we feel that way, and then certainly when we emote that or when we express that, that usually it's met with something very negative. It signals to our brain that there's a lack of safety, right? We're not safe when we feel this way. So when our kids exhibit those same emotions, that primal part of our brain is still there and alive, right? So we sense that and we're like, uh-oh, danger, danger, danger. You can't feel this way. It's bad, bad, bad. Don't feel this way. Stop it, stop it, stop it, right? We go into either correcting mode, fixing mode, making it go away mode, whatever it is. But we have a very strong response to it. And usually it's rooted in childhood. It's just based on, and again, you could have wonderful parents. I'm not talking about cases of like severe neglect or abuse or anything like that. It just was the way we were parented, that usually it was just met with something very negative when you express those emotions. So that mantra, being able to say, I am safe and okay, and so are they, will just help bring you right back into your body. You're going to steady yourself in that moment. You're reminding yourself that you're okay. You're reminding yourself that your child's okay. And just keep repeating it. Just keep repeating it. It's going to allow you to stay calm and to recognize that really we have to experience all emotions. We really do. It will help us evolve in better ways. It will help us grow and expand. And I'm not just talking about kids, right? So these are really necessary pieces that we need. The next thing we really want to think about is taking a break if you really have to. I have some parents who are so overwhelmed with the amount of dysregulation and the power struggles and the amount of things that are going on. Sometimes you just might want to give yourself one day where maybe for that one day you're kind of taking a break. You're laying low. You're not placing a lot of demands on your kids. You're not going to set a ton of boundaries. You're going to give yourself that day to just reset. There's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. Give yourself the space, especially because as you fatigue, the more fatigued you are, the less likely you are going to be able to set a boundary, co-regulate with your kids, calm yourself down while they're completely escalated. Remind yourself that you're safe. When your bandwidth isn't there either, it really becomes problematic for everybody. So really give yourself that space. And if you have to take a day, which I call a no demands day, just do it. Just do it. I promise you, you won't set yourself back. You're not going to derail anything. You're not going to, nothing like that. We jump right back the next day and we hit go and we keep going. Okay, we talked about this too, what to do in the moment, but say less. Say less. In fact, say nothing. Just do the boundary empathy sandwich that I talked about, and then you're just going to really calmly stay there. So you don't want to say a lot. Don't over explain your boundary. We've said this before. You don't want to constantly go in and rationalize why you are setting that boundary. You can't have a popsicle because we talked about this. When you eat a popsicle, then you don't eat your full dinner, and then you don't get all the healthy food, and then you just have the junky food. Like, just stop. It's not necessary. He doesn't need a lecture in the health benefits of, chicken and broccoli versus the popsicle. It's totally fine. It won't help. Just feel confident in the boundary that you're setting. And then if they become physical during a tantrum, number one job is to keep them safe and to keep everything around them safe, people, yourself. So when that's happening, there's one thing I want you to know. For younger children, a lot of times we want to get on their level when they're physically difficult to manage and we were trying to calm them down. Don't do that. Stand up. Physically speaking, they are so strong and they're so unable to modulate their strength in that moment. They will hit, they will pull, they will throw, they will do things. You're much better off standing up in a neutral position, not like hovering over them in a dominant way and arms crossed across your chest, nothing like that. Stand with your hands at your side and do the same thing. Stay calm, tell them they're safe. Sometimes you have to physically pick them up and take them to a smaller area where they can't hurt themselves. Sometimes you have to actually hold them until they might calm down. depending on the age of the child and the size of the child. Again, you're going to want to make sure you are as calm as possible when this is happening. Otherwise, it can start to feel like an incredibly kind of tense situation. You want to really be there and just help them physically calm their bodies down, but you want to keep them safe. And the only thing you want to think about saying is, I will not let you hit me. You want to really own the fact that you are the authority in that moment. And you also want to know you want them to know that you are so unfazed and you are not rattled by what is happening. So in a nutshell, those are like really quick bullets. There's so much more to this. I wish I could give you guys hours and hours of just different types of support because there's so much to unpack and say. But if you're ever interested, this is a lot of what I do in my one-on-one coaching sessions. I'm working with families. And again, there's a reason it's a minimum of 2 months. And it's because to make meaningful change, it just takes time. You're never going to change it overnight. So having that support, having that one-on-one, being able to text me and message me throughout the day and say, all right, this just happened. What should I do? Those are really critical pieces that are going to help change the course of how you're helping your child work through dysregulation and then eventually get to self-regulation. And also tools for yourself, right? Tools that we were really never taught. How do we heal some of those areas within ourselves so that we can really show up and be that present, strong parent that our child needs us to be? So I will throw a link in the show notes. I am taking new clients starting in, I believe, the end of May. So I will open up more spots for one-on-one coaching there. If you wanted to learn more about it, I do free 20-minute consult calls where I get to know you a little bit more, hear a little bit about some of the challenges coming up for you. And I get to describe a little bit more about what coaching would look like. And we just decide if it's the right fit for you. And if not, I can usually point you at least into some other direction of where I think additional support could be helpful. So that's it for now. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be back. Until next time.